It'll be okay.
Welcome back to In Our Issues, a podcast where we learn what it's like to be in the shoes of people with mental health issues. My name is Nathan Donnelly, and, well, happy PTSD Awareness Day, guys. That's when this episode is coming out, and how appropriate that we be talking about PTSD, specifically CPTSD, complex post-traumatic stress disorder. We compare and contrast it to PTSD and talk about the intricacies of this particular mental disposition. Born from a mind that's under stress for an extended period of time, CPTSD is actually a new diagnosis that is now on the rise. We get a little into the fact that we feel like the modern day thinks PTSD happens to war veterans and people who experience extreme physical trauma, which it absolutely does. But it also happens to people who are just living their lives and happen to be in situations that put them in uncomfortable, stressful mindsets. So, let's get into it. Without further ado, here is the IOI crew. All right, everyone. Welcome back to In Our Issues.
Yay!
Today we're talking about PTSD and CPTSD. We're going to talk a little bit about the differences between them and also just get into what they are and how they're caused. Amanda is kind of our resident expert on PTSD. She's done a lot of research.
Well, CPTSD. I'm more well versed on CPTSD than I am PTSD.
And she's the expert, but it's because she paid the price for it.
Right.
So you paid for your education,
I'm the lived
didn't you?
experience expert.
I'm the lived experience expert. I think so. I definitely I've been diagnosed with PTSD, but the more I learn about CPTSD, the more I think it sounds like me. So I think I might be a bit of a resident expert myself. But to begin, I wanted to get into what it is and what causes it. So when you say PTSD, what do you think the general population thinks?
Probably veterans.
Yeah.
Veterans and war.
It might be the first thing.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah. And that's...
or like a extremely traumatic event, like a car accident or a sexual assault or something of the like. Something
physical and overwhelming that creates a memory that's hard to get away from. And trauma.
I'm sorry. Does it have to be physical?
No. Okay. Absolutely not.
No, but that's what the people like. The first thing that people think, probably, most likely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like
so
if we were to do
was.
like a Family Feud, we asked
100
100 people in America what they think of when they say PTSD.
Yep.
Bing.
Yeah.
Physical is probably on the board somewhere.
Yeah, physical and military. Well, PTSD can come from not physical abuse and or trauma, but mental abuse and trauma as well. And it can cause life-altering effects that cause somebody to regress into behavior that is motivated by fear and, abdications and just generally running away from yourself.
Did you say abdications? Like,
abdicating, yes.
Yeah, like you're getting rid of your responsibility, walking away.
Basically, yeah, okay. That's kind of what I was getting at for sure. It's scary stuff. But yeah, it can be physical, or mental, emotional. I know that the PTSD I was diagnosed with is very much mental, emotional. Luckily, I'm lucky enough to have not experienced any sort of physical or sexual abuse growing up, but there are people out there that have and suffer from it, and it's intense.
Shout out my people.
Yeah, really. I'm sorry. I'm
sorry.
If I need
try to make light of situations.
If I need to not interrupt you, let me know. But
you're good.
I've been saying this for years, and you've heard it, and you can call me out on it now because you know a lot more about this, both you do, than I do.
Mm-hmm.
I have this feeling that at some time in the future, not too far away, we're going to come to the understanding that most of what we call mental illness is caused by trauma, with the exception of maybe psychosis to some degree. But let me finish.
Okay.
Thank you, because I see I'm about to get ripped up, and that's okay. But I think, I've talked to plenty of people who have told me about being abused in the church that don't have PTSD from that. Trauma is really subjective. in my opinion. But car accident's a really good example. I could have a car accident and not pay my bill for my car for 6 months and not take it to the shop and avoid it, abdicate it. Or I could have a car wreck and show up at work an hour later and be fine. So it's very, very subjective stuff. One thing, that's all I got.
So in relation to that, I always say that if we were to take all of the trauma-related disorders out of the DSM-5, we would most likely have a trifold. Because I do, and that's just my personal opinion, right? There's many, many, many psychiatrists and people of the mental health profession that believe, something very differently than I. I've only been doing mental health research for the past decade or so. So it's really not, and that's through my own volition, not through any, university or, things like that, just reading and really kind of absorbing all the information that I can. And from what I have learned, and especially being trauma responsive care certified as well, is that trauma, there is big T trauma and there is little T trauma, right? Your little T traumas are like, what you just described about like the car situation to some people, right? Or like their dog dying. Some people that would be a big T trauma for, some that would be a little T trauma.
Right, you're right.
But it's basically how your body is impacted by that event and how it impacts you after, which is kind of what we'll get into as well, the difference between PTSD and CPTSD. And I think trauma is a really important conversation. And this conversation, I think, is really important to get started. Because defining trauma, I think, is something that a lot of people, they have their thoughts and their feelings and their differing opinions about what exactly trauma is. But from my understanding, what I've learned, it's things that cause your nervous system to be dysregulated and to give you a reaction that is of fight, flight, freeze, fawn.
Or fawn. Yeah.
What's the fawn one?
Or flee.
We can get into that.
Okay, fair enough. Let me
in a minute, but yeah.
Shit, man, I'm sorry. The fact that it's subjective, I don't know. I
actually wanted to say something on that, if you don't mind.
No.
Just the fact that you brought it up that it's subjective is a very good perspective because it really takes into
wrong wording.
You think it's the wrong wording?
Yeah, I think subjective is the wrong wording because I think more it is person dependent, I think is kind of the language that we want to use.
Okay. But
that's kind of what I was thinking.
Defined the same as subjective?
To me, when I hear subjective, I think it's whatever anybody wants to make it, right? But that's how I feel when I hear subjective. Whereas when trauma is differing in the person, it's not just about what they want or what they're conscious of, right? Like it's more of unconsciously, genetically, systemically, what is impacting them at that level.
Yeah.
And that's like not really subjective. That's kind of subconscious.
Right, but it's still their interpretation because of their paradigm, because of their environment, because of their
it's their
life.
experience. Yeah,
which goes into the subjective. I think that both wordings are like they both have their own merit. But my point is that when you said subjective, it made me think because someone's experience with a certain situation can be completely different from someone else's experience with that situation. It could be the most mundane thing in the world to one person, but it could be earth-shattering to someone else.
100%.
And it also depends on resiliency factors. Those are things that we also have to put into perspective when we're talking about trauma and how they impact people.
True. Now, here's what I wanted to mention. So that kind of dives into the body keeps the score territory. So you're saying that to be PTSD or CPTSD, your body actually has to have a physiological reaction.
Yeah.
Okay.
Definitely.
All right, cool. I'm good.
Basically.
But in different ways, like with PTSD and CPTSD, but we'll go into kind of like the differences and the similarities between the two.
In either case, your brain has to figure out something's not right.
Yeah, it has to calculate this thing as I'm in survival mode.
Yeah, okay, good.
This is a direct threat to my well-being.
So we're going to define them and talk about their differences now. So what's the difference between PTSD and CPTSD?
Are you asking me?
Amanda.
Okay. So essentially, CPTSD stands for complex post-traumatic stress disorder, by the way.
I would have missed that.
And essentially, the difference that I like to speak on it, and the way that I've come to understand it, right? I always advocate for doing your own research and taking everything that we say with a grain of salt, because we're not mental health professionals and we don't know everything about everything. But for me personally, in my journey and the things that I have learned, is that complex post-traumatic stress disorder is long-term. It is oftentimes relational. And when I think about PTSD, it's more of factors outside of us. Whereas CPTSD is a lot more relational, a lot more long-term. So, and a lot of times, not always, but oftentimes CPTSD is developed in your developmental years. Mm-hmm. But if we're looking at, situations like abusive relationships, you can develop CPTSD from an abusive relationship later on in life,
as a grown-up.
Kind of at any time as a grown-up. Okay. Yeah, because in order for it to be CPTSD, it has to fundamentally change the way that you operate, right? Because with PTSD, you have oftentimes an event that happens, right? And there's a before and there's an after that event.
Yeah.
And so you have the development on your side. Like, you have developed prior to that traumatic event.
Yeah,
and
this is an outlying event.
Yeah, and then the traumatic event happens, and then it changes you, and you have to cope through it and work through it. And sometimes it changes you for a long time, and it changes the way you see something in general, but you still have that core sense of self there. You still have that core of who you are, right? And sometimes when people experience really, really traumatic events, sometimes that core gets very tainted and they have to work really, really hard to develop a new version of themselves.
You gave me goosebumps on that one because, that can occur at any time. And what I heard you say with the core thing was you lose your sense of self and your sense of...
You self-abandon.
Self-worth. I got to get back to one thing just because I don't want to be
don't want to forget.
Be wrong about it.
Okay.
So is this like pronouns and person first language and inclusiveness? I don't say subjective anymore. I say person centered.
I think for me that sounds more accurate.
Okay.
Because subjective to me
has a bad connotation.
Well, not
or different connotation.
Different connotation, but for me, subjective feels like you have some semblance of control over it.
Okay,
like
good.
it's your opinion.
Okay,
so like that's what I feel when I hear the word subjective.
Just give me one sentence using the right phrase.
So instead, I would say more like person dependent.
Okay,
like it depends on the person.
Thank you. I'm good.
Yeah,
got it.
And I think that's important to put into perspective. And I think too, like when we're looking at complex post-traumatic stress disorder, and we'll go into this too with like the key symptomatic differences, which I think you probably have there, is that at the core, it really, really developmentally impacts you and changes you, oftentimes for a very, very, very long time. And you have to work very, very, very hard to bring yourself back because your nervous system and your, fight or flight or your survival tactics are so engaged for so long, oftentimes years and years.
Yeah, I can see when you have a cognitive thought, I'd like to change this. Your brain's like, no. We worked really, really hard to get here. Don't fuck it up.
That's why it's really difficult too when you're looking at things like, developmental trauma and trauma in your childhood. Because in an example like myself, my entire personality is developed around survival.
Yeah.
There was no before for me. There has always just been the trauma.
Yep.
And my life growing up was trauma. So my brain actually had to really wire itself around that survival and to, adapt for any kind of threat at any time. And I think that, that's the real key difference that I see with the two.
That's terrifying. And I understand it now. And shout out to Taylor Tomlinson. I thought everybody got tied up in their backyard on the 4th of July. That's how you were raised. That's the universe to you. To your brain, that's how the world should be.
Yeah.
And I need to say something here.
Yeah.
So, the big difference between PTSD and CPTSD is that complex post-traumatic stress disorder is the result. It's generally considered a more intense version of PTSD
Sounds
because
like it to
it
me,
has
man.
it's trauma generated from a very long period of time where you were experiencing regular abuse or mistreatment. Whereas PTSD is more about a singular event that happened. Make sense?
Or an event state, right? Like, so when they say that veterans, they have PTSD from war, right? So they come home and every time they hear a firework, they freak out. Like, that event did last for a long time, but if it's a singular event that they can like.
I'm thinking, just based on what I've heard you two talk about in the last 10 minutes, we're going to separate these two too, because they're not the same.
Yeah, no,
they're
not.
actually not even that closely related. Okay.
They are related in the way that symptomatically
They present.
very similarly.
Yeah.
But I think when you get down to the nitty gritty of like the development of it, and the way in which it impacts your day to day, it is very different. And
Yeah.
it's also, like we said, subjective or person dependent on what the exact experience was.
Yeah.
Because it can look very different to everybody, but there's also, criteria that you need to meet.
CPTSD like I said, affected by it's created. Sorry, that just distracted the hell out of me. It's created by long periods of time where you're experiencing abuse and neglect or abandonment. Both Amanda and I have experience with this in our childhood. What happens as a result is that you tend to get there's a couple different things that can result from it. One I want to talk about is emotional flashbacks,
or visceral flashbacks.
Yeah. So you should tell me what visceral is in a minute, but basically this is when this is like the flashback is very much where PTSD and CPTSD have common ground.
Yes.
With CPTSD, they can vary in intensity and duration and last for very, very long periods of time, even years. It depends on the severity of the situation, because if you weren't taught to go to bat for yourself and stand up for yourself, you can feel trapped in your own mind, and your fight or flight is activated. And there's actually a couple different. It can be there's two more that we want to add to this. There's fight.
There's actually
flight,
5.
Fear, fawn. Well, not fear. Excuse me. What was the fifth one?
Freeze.
Flight, fight, freeze, fawn, and flee.
Flee. Bet. Okay.
And when you're 3, you can't really do any of that.
Exactly.
Yeah, you can't really do any of that. So what happens is, if you're a child and your attempt as a child, it's important you desire connection with your parents, with your caretakers, and if your desires for connection are met with disdain or just generally frowned upon, the child will stop reaching out for connection entirely because they expect to be treated with disdain, and that's not very comfortable. So then they succumb. I'm almost done. Okay. So then they surrender to feeling like that will be their life. That is the way they're going to be treated, and they succumb to deep depressive loneliness.
They abdicated their right to be assertive.
I think too, like we actually see this in babies who their parents just let them cry. This is causing children to. This is why, like, I am a firm believer of don't just let your kid cry it out, like even when they're a newborn, because all they know how to do, that's the only way they know how to communicate, is to cry to get their needs met, right? And then when you allow your child to sit and just cry and cry and cry it out, they're realizing then that crying doesn't get their needs met. So then they internalize that anxiety or that need that they're feeling, and then that stays with them for a long time.
Explain that.
What do you need clarification on?
What does that mean? It stays with them.
So essentially they learn from that point on, from, that development from when they're children, that crying will not get their needs met. So they can't do that. They have to internalize their needs, and then it can lead to an anxiety disorder later on in life.
Okay.
It can literally lead to, childhood anxiety or childhood depression.
It should lead to something horrible.
Yeah, because that is a form of neglect.
Yeah.
Whether people, this could be a hot topic, and this could be, some people may get very offended by that, but that is just the science behind it.
That's good. I mean, because I just learned that with dogs, for example, when you're training one, you let them cry in their crate. You don't, I was going to say ameliorate, but I don't know what that means. You don't assuage their fears.
Yeah. Because there's no, when you're talking about babies and you're talking about small children who just came out of the womb, and you're saying, oh, they need to learn how to self-soothe. They don't know how to do that. They don't have the tools for that. They don't know what the hell that means, right? They only can learn self-soothe when they get to the certain age where they can understand what that means or what that looks like.
Yep.
When they are newborn babies, they don't know what that is, nor do they understand how to do that.
So you said there's research on, because that's really fascinating.
Yes, this is something that I learned in my trauma responsive care certification.
That's fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
Got you. And I definitely identify with feelings of in the sense that, I was the one obviously neurodivergent child in my family. And so, I often felt like my parents paid, and I still kind of feel like they pay way more attention to my other siblings. It's kind of, so I'm still learning to, the opposite of abdicate for myself. Just go to bat for myself in that way, because I kind of just got used to feeling like I was a disappointment. And it's it sounds sad now that I say it, but the point is that this situation is improving. And I'm having good conversations with my parents.
Because I know what you're talking about, and you've made incredible progress, and your parents have too. I'm not saying that you were the one that needed to figure out what was going on, because there were 3 of you in that relationship, but you put yourself out there and got some good feedback, which is nice.
Yeah, it's really heartening to me, because that really kind of in a way heals my own inner child to hear that you're having that experience. Because there's been
goosebumps.
Yeah, there's been times where I've had conversations, with my mom, and I was like,
with your child.
Yeah, and I was like, I didn't know how to emotionally regulate, so I've never learned that. So here I am, baby deer legs, trying to figure out how to regulate my emotions, because nobody ever taught me how to do that. And she said, well, that's not my fault. And I was like, literally, that was your fucking job as a parent, was to teach me emotional regulation, and to teach me these skills on how to be a person. And so in a way, you do have some ownership over the way that I turned out.
Not in a way, I think in a big way.
I didn't make this comment earlier, but I was going to say, I'm surprised that there's not a litigation, ability to go back and sue your parents. I mean,
reparations.
Exactly. Reparations. Exactly.
But what I have learned too, is that she doesn't have the tools. And that's the thing, is she both of my parents are incredibly emotionally immature, and that's a whole thing, right?
Does it matter to you, just curious, if she doesn't have the tools or if she doesn't give a fuck about the tools?
It doesn't matter either way, because I think for me, for some people it may matter, and I'm not.
And that's why I asked. I'm just curious.
I'm not in the total acceptance realm right now with it, which maybe I'll get there one day. But
TAR.
Yeah, I think it's. I was reading Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents, and get the book, by the way, it's really good.
Trying to do the acronym.
And it was teaching me that these people can't show up for you because they can't show up for yourself, and that's just the reality of the situation.
Yeah.
And
they can't show up for themselves, you mean?
Yeah. And it was really painting a picture of how that often turns out, how you in adulthood turn out because of these things.
Yeah.
And it made me feel a lot less alone, because I did realize that, you know, I'm not the only one that's gone through this, and this stuff is actually like in this freaking book that tells me how I am, which is kind of interesting.
I got to stop you because I'm going to say this earlier. This sounds to me like it could get ugly for somebody emotionally. So I would like to know where we're going to end, like in a safe place. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, of course.
Oh, bet.
Yeah, we definitely have to make sure that we're allowing people to walk out of this episode not with any open wounds. So
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I don't personally feel like it's necessary to really go into the nitty gritty of the stuff that I've been through. But I think it is important to mention the things. But
I do too. And I think it's one thing for people to go, yeah, I get that. They get that. But I want to leave with something that's positive.
yeah, hopeful, right?
Not like, here's all the bad shit you can go through. You're welcome.
But like, look at me. I'm sitting here and talking to you guys on this podcast and being able to like help people. And
you know what? That's huge. That's bigger than you even can imagine. Goosebumps again. That's 3 times already.
Nice. Yeah, it's the last thing I'll say from my experience is just that all of my siblings are very studious and they get good grades, and my mother is just extremely like type A, and just, you know, everything has to be a certain way, and I differed from that, and so I was treated differently.
You didn't fit in the mold.
Yeah.
And I think that is to say too, like, just to mention that is kind of what we were talking about last episode, is having that neurodivergence in your developmental years and like not fitting in the same way as other people, and having that experience not only within your family system, but like from like a school perspective or a friend perspective, that can be extremely damaging to a child, and extremely hard, because society is built around, you know, this specific mold that we all have to fit in, and not being in that mold and being treated like an other and not being taken seriously, and maybe not even being diagnosed until adulthood, comes with its own trauma. So you see a lot of overlap too, which I did want to mention this before we get into, you know, more and more, and I kind of mentioned this last episode, but there is a lot of overlap between being neurodivergent and having CPTSD because of that experience.
Yeah, and here's the thing is like, the big thing is that I felt like I was treated differently. I felt like an outsider. It's like, it might not even seem like that to the caregivers. You know what I mean?
Oh, no,
they might not see it that way, but I felt that way. I felt like I couldn't speak up about it, and I'm still working on that. But this is such a great conversation to be having right now, because the book I read for research just talks endlessly about like how CPTSD is like just prominent in like just toxic family situations.
Okay, you both mentioned the book. Will you put them in the...
Put it in the description?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Is that the Pete Walker one?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Look at you guys.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll put it in the description. But yeah, so basically, the emotional flashbacks, back to that the fight or flight is activated. We went on a tangent when we got there. So fear. So basically, there's largely two types of emotional flashbacks in the sense of how they elicit emotion. One, if it's a fear type flashback and you're flooded with fear, you tend to be in a state of panic or panicky or up. You're on alert and you're
hypervigilant. Yeah.
Exactly. And then there's also despair flashbacks that will make you numb and paralyzed, like you can't move. I have a lot of experience with those, actually, like, and you just feel nothing. And
mine's more on the opposite side, so that's cool that we have differing perspectives.
I have the opposite side too, but the despair one, when I read of those, I was just like, oh yes, so that's what that feels like. I literally just sitting in my chair and just wondering why I even exist. Like,
yeah, I have those a lot too, but for me it manifests more on the hypervigilant side, which has just been my entire life, so it's hard for me to see outside of that.
Got you. And all of these emotional emotional flashbacks are overlaid with what we call toxic shame.
That part.
Which
is a great name for an album.
Essentially, which essentially is the feelings that essentially, like, what happens is when you're a child who has been treated with disdain, when you need connection, you start to feel ashamed of needing connection, which is like one of the most human things you could possibly ever need. Well, and so when you have shame that interferes with your needs and makes you feel like it's wrong to need something, that is toxic as hell because you can't grow.
And as children, like, we are wired to think the world really does revolve around us because that's all we know, because we need to get our needs met developmentally as children.
Did you guys grow out of that?
And so, like, when our needs aren't being met, like, we don't have the cognition as children in our developmental ages to look outside of ourselves as, oh, this is something that's not my fault. We don't have that ability yet. Like, depending on like what age you experienced the trauma, like, that ability didn't exist. I don't remember the specific ages, but that's something that plays into toxic shame, is the fact that, like, your mom is upset and she's displaying passive aggressive behavior around you, slamming doors, you know, stomping her feet, not explaining what's going on with her, or like vocalizing what's wrong. You automatically think you did something wrong or that it's your fault because you can't like conceptualize the idea that something else is going on with her, especially if she does not vocalize that. That's something that I experienced a lot.
I do that a lot still. And the way I get out of that, you've heard me say this, is I stick to the facts. When you're 4 or 11 or 8, you can't do that because the facts are, you're right. The facts are the world revolves around me. I need to be fed. I need to be changed. I need to have clothes. I need to have a place to sleep. Fuck all y'all. That's what I need.
Especially in an environment, for me specifically, where like there was no communication emotionally to be had at all. So if anybody was upset or anything was going on, nobody would talk about it.
You were getting emotional communication. It was just like dead air, and that's even terrifying.
Like,
it was very much
very
much like stonewalling, very much like, I'm not going to talk to you, or, you know, I was never vocalized when I did something wrong, and if I did, it was thrown back my face 2 weeks later. So I was automatically then there, my body was trained to be hyper vigilant and to be constantly on call for if something was wrong, and constantly checking myself for what did I do wrong? Did I spill something? Did I not put my jacket back? Like, and that really contributes to my type A personality, and really contributes to my, you know, almost obsessions to make sure that everything is going right, everything is okay. And if not, and I can't do something, I feel so ashamed. I feel that toxic shame so heavily. Like, it's so terrible. And I think it also plays into my OCD as well, but that can be for another episode in the future.
We'll have an OCD episode, that's for sure. We'll just gotta do some research. That's toxic shame is like a great hindrance to people who experience it. It becomes an abandonment melange, more or less. It's a hodgepodge of like fear, despair, self-abandonment, which we're going to get into. It just swirls and swirls, and it's so hard to get away from sometimes. But you surrender to that. You just surrender to it, to being humiliated by your basic needs, like by just having basic needs and just stuff like, you know, like it's scary stuff. But I mentioned self-abandonment, and that's what's next. So that's another thing that CPTSD can cause, is self-abandonment. And when we say self-abandonment, we mean more or less you can't stick up for yourself, or you won't stick up for yourself or speak up for yourself because toxic shame gets in the way. You're ashamed of, you've been taught to be ashamed of who you are, so you can't really go to bat for yourself because you don't believe that you're worth something. So it's kind of scary to be stuck in feelings like that, because you know, it's the kind of thing that you like. It requires it requires healing to get out of, and if you don't have the capacity to heal, I've known people that I think are like some of the smartest people I've ever known. They're brilliant, right? But they've got this holding these toxic beliefs holding them back from their true potential, and it makes me want to just.
That's where I get the big difference in CPTSD and PTSD, because With CPTSD, you know something's not right, but you have no idea what right looks like.
Yeah.
PTSD, you had an event, right? You had a past, and you may have had things going pretty well in the past, and you can look back on that and say, okay, what worked? But not when you've been born with it.
Yeah. Not always in that. And I think for me, like, that just actually, you saying all of that stuff kind of brought up a weird realization for me in this moment, because I've been going through a journey lately of a lot of self-abandonment and realizing how much I have self-abandoned over the years. And I realized, you know, just when you said that it may be a bit of that toxic shame that is driving the boat here with me. Because when I was a child and I needed my needs to be met, and I tried to advocate for myself as a child for my needs to get met, it would be met with raging, or it would be met with, you know, just toxicity, or like anger, or like annoyance, right? So I always felt like my needs were never important. But yet I was the I always say like Captain Save-A-Ho. In my childhood, like, I don't even know how else to put it, but like when there was distressing situations, I always found myself running towards them to fix them for the people around me, because I didn't have that. So I then developed this like healer helper complex that like now has been so ingrained in me as an adult that I self-abandon because I feel ashamed of speaking up for my needs, because I am still so afraid. And this is, you know, kind of like an emotional flashback type ordeal, is like when I go to set a boundary, I have that emotional flashback of being so neglected for my emotions that I just completely shut down and shame myself. Like, this isn't even worth it. Like, you don't even deserve to stick up for yourself, because it's just going to turn into this whole thing. And this is why interpersonal relationships are extremely difficult.
So is there...
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, of course.
I don't want to do this because I'm not worth it. What are you worth?
Great question. I have no idea.
Is there a baseline?
If you ask me, you're worth a whole damn lot. You got a lot of shit to share. You've been through a lot of shit, and you're sharing that shit, and it's going to be, you know, like empathetically numenostic.
Oh, okay.
If you know what I mean.
Words. Stamp collecting.
But I think
numenostic meaning, that's internally
numismatic.
Healing for anybody who hears it.
Oh, nice. I like that.
I've stuck my neck out for you a couple times.
I think that, you know, your point is a good one, and that when you come, and this is where resiliency factors come into play, right? Like, if you experience a traumatic event and you have one person in your life that is there to help you regulate from that traumatic event, your resiliency factors go up like extremely. Like, I don't remember the specific percentage. I probably have it somewhere, but it's huge. Just having that one person to help you through it makes a huge difference. And I think that's what helps people develop their sense of self and their sense of self-worth. Whereas when I go back and take stock of my childhood and like things that have happened, I didn't have that. I didn't have that, even that one person.
I could see where that would lead to a really terribly unfortunate emotional relationship, though. If you've got one person that all of a sudden is like believing in you, whoa, I can see you could put way too much weight on that.
Yeah, that's true too. But also, like, if we look at, you know, I mean, it could...
If it's a person that you're in an interpersonal relationship with. Like
right. But like, if you look at, you know, a child in their developmental years, it could be like an aunt or a grandparent. Or like you know.
Yeah, a teacher.
And that's what it became for me when I was, you know, in elementary and middle school. But then we can then go down the road where it comes to limerence, which is another occurrence where... That's another topic for a whole other day, but it's when we develop obsessions for specific people because they feed that childhood need.
As a grown-up or as a child, either?
It could be either or. I mean, it happens oftentimes in adults. Like, for me, it happened at one point with Justin Bieber, at one point with Nick Jonas. And then as an adult, like, I will attach myself to famous people and like kind of like obsess over them. This can also happen in interpersonal relationships, closer relationships, where you have maybe like a friend or, you know, somebody that you've talked to a few times, and then you think like all their posts that they're posting are directed towards you, or like, you know, things like that. That's something that we oftentimes develop out of childhood emotional neglect.
Did you know that you did not have a personal relationship with Nick Jonas?
Yes.
Okay.
You're obviously you're cognizant of it.
Okay.
But there's like levels to limerence.
Okay.
It gives you like that's another thing. Healing fantasies. That's what that is like you just
Maladaptive daydreaming.
you come up with like just something about some person, some influence, something is gives you hope or some kind
distraction,
healthy or unhealthy. It can be healthy, but it can also be unhealthy to be distracted too much by something that is actually not going to help you.
Yes.
Is this why adolescents throw themselves into music?
Could be.
What?
I mean, I think that's just generally a coping tactic.
Okay.
Well, yeah, I think when you're an adolescent, you're you're discovering, negative emotions.
I definitely, though that you said
big
that,
negative emotions.
Yeah, I definitely leaned on music heavily when I was a kid as escapism.
I still lean on it.
I thought I was Eminem for a minute. Like I literally thought that Eminem was literally speaking to me. Like we had the same fucking childhood because I was listening to like cleaning out my closet and like all that kind of stuff on the bus ride to school every morning. And I was like, I feel this in such like a visceral way that like I feel so seen and so heard, which I think why conversations like this are so important, and like podcasts now and discussions about mental health and CPTSD are so important, because CPTSD, I will say, was not developed until about 1992.
Mm-hmm. Oh no, we developed it a long time ago.
Right, yeah. But it wasn't
We've been working on that for a long time.
It wasn't understood.
Yeah, it was coined by Judith Herman in about 1992. And then we have been talking about PTSD for a much longer time. So there's so much more research. But because CPTSD is so new in its development, we're still kind of learning and fleshing it out and trying to figure out the ins and outs of it.
God bless her, but I wish she wouldn't have attached it to PTSD. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean,
could have gone a whole different direction.
It could have, but I think that it makes sense.
Yeah,
it does make sense.
It makes sense.
You're post-traumatic stress disorder. You're experiencing stress after a trauma, and then complex basically just means it's compounded trauma that you're experiencing a stressor from, and then you develop that disorder from.
Now, you mentioned the word visceral. Do you want to do that now?
Oh yeah, when we're talking about emotional flashbacks, I think it's really important to also talk about the physical and the visceral flashbacks. So visceral meaning extremely physical. And that's something that when you do experience, physical or sexual abuse as a child, that re-experiencing into adulthood, or even into, further in your life, in your adolescence. Because for me, I experienced that abuse at around 7, and then I remembered it. I repressed it, meaning I pushed it down and pushed it away, and I didn't remember anything that happened to me until I was 13 years old. And it started because I was having visceral, physical flashbacks. And it's really important to put into perspective that the way that memory is stored in our body is very interesting, right?
Yeah.
We have picture memory and we have body memory. And when we experience trauma, those two are separated oftentimes. So the body memory is separate from the picture memory, and it takes some time and it takes a lot of work to put the two together.
And those are stored in different places too.
Yes.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of time to have them meet in the middle, right? So I was experiencing the body memory before I ever got the picture memory, before the picture memory caught up to the body memory.
Is that confusing?
It's so confusing.
Okay.
I literally thought that I was going through psychosis. I was going crazy. I thought I was putting shit in my head. Like I thought I was doing it for attention. Like I literally did not know what was going on with me, but I was physically re-experiencing what happened to me before I ever remembered what actually happened to me. And so it was a really weird experience. And it was really interesting to be such a young kid navigating, puberty and middle school and, interpersonal relationships for the first time, school dances. People were just getting interested in boys. And I would feel disgusted if anybody would touch me. I didn't like being hugged. I didn't like being touched. And I never knew why. Like my friends were literally having these deep connections with other people, like making out and stuff, the movie theater. And for me, I thought it was disgusting. I thought it was gross. I was very just didn't like any of that kind of stuff. And I realized later on when the picture memory came back, I think it was 1.5 years, 2 years later, that was what happened. And I still didn't really know until, I researched and Google, or actually it was Ask Jeeves and Google and stuff like that were finally a thing at that point. And so I was able to do a little bit of what is wrong with me kind of thing, like typing in like blah, 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 question mark. And I was able to find a blog post of this woman who talked about her repression and how she was handling it, how she was dealing with it, and like why it was happening to her, and like her conversations with her therapist. And that was something that was like really, really profound in my healing process.
Very huge for you.
Because of the fact that I was validated for the first time probably in my entire life. That experience that I experienced was real, and I wasn't putting it in my own head. And I would talk to my therapist at the time. And I want to share this with other people because I think it's really important. Is I was talking to my therapist at the time, and I was like, I can't remember, and it makes me feel like, nothing really happened. And she's like, it doesn't matter if you remember it. What matters is the feelings that you feel about the situation, and we have to work on that together. Like that's what we need to work on. Is your feelings, not whether or not they happen, not whether or not they're valid. Is those feelings exist for you? So those need to be taken into account, and we need to work on them.
Now, I totally get that, and I think that's a great approach to pretty much anything. But that did not in any way invalidate your feelings. That sounds like a tacit. Okay, you have them, you earned them. Now let's move forward.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think too, like, and when we're talking about visceral flashbacks, right? It doesn't have to be as serious as that. Like, it doesn't have to be as serious as my experience. Like. You have the emotional flashback, right? To where like if somebody doesn't text you back, you feel that sense of like huge rejection.
Yeah.
Like, and you have this big emotional response to something so small.
Yeah.
That is an emotional flashback. But you can also get, physical flashbacks as well to instances that are not as extreme.
All right, I'm going to ask you a question. You don't have to answer it. If you're at Kroger and you smell something, is that can that turn into a visceral reaction flashback?
Yeah, it can. I mean, it can go either way. I think just depending. I mean, for me, sometimes it can just be purely emotional, and I won't be feeling any of the physical manifestations in that time. Like I'll smell it, and smell is like the worst thing for me. Is I'll smell something, and then it'll send me right back to when it's happening. Sometimes I will literally re-experience it in real time, and close my eyes, and I can literally like see it, feel the floor, smell the smells, like everything. Like I really fucking go back there.
That's the visceral part.
Sometimes, yeah. But then sometimes it'll just be like the grossness, like just the feelings. Like I'll realize I'll be rooted and grounded in reality. Like here I am, I'm here, I know I'm at the grocery store, but like I will just feel gross and dirty and disgusting and want to cry and want to shout and want to scream.
So if your brain is accessing those memories, the picture, that's where you get the visceral.
It just really depends because I had visceral responses for a very long time without the picture.
No, I mean, but there are two reactions that we're getting from memories, right? There's the picture and there's the emotion.
Well, there's the re-experiencing that can happen, which can happen both emotionally and viscerally. But most of the time it's emotional and physical.
Now you know when you have a visceral reaction.
Yeah.
But when you didn't?
It was so fucking scary. Like I literally felt like it was happening all over again. It's so weird.
Yeah.
And from my understanding of PTSD, sometimes those things happen as well with PTSD.
Okay.
Yeah, but I wanted to say, like, bringing it back to self-abandonment, I felt like...
I don't know how I got on that tangent. I'm sorry.
I felt like I was just... dude, I didn't stop self-abandoning until late last year.
I still haven't.
Like...
Give me some tips. Can you let me know how to do it? Because I'm still fucking struggling over here.
Healing.
Shit, I've been doing that for the past decade.
Yeah, like, but it's like, for me, I'm reconnecting with, I'm just connecting with my parents and sticking up for myself and getting my needs met and stuff like that.
I think that's
huge.
Super healing.
That's
awesome.
huge. But it's also, I've started reconnecting with people that I had really special connections with that I also feared hated me, and just because of because of the self-abandoning I was doing, I wouldn't in an as enthusiastic way
Yeah.
as I would have otherwise. And dude, I honestly just feel like I don't even really like, I feel so vastly different from myself now that it's so painful sometimes to think about like
Who you used to be?
or what I could have been if I wasn't suffering.
God, that fucking part.
Let me stop you there.
Like
That's a non-starter. You can't go down that road.
but I do.
No, I go down, and I think that's really normal when you experience trauma, because that's something that I have,
It is.
Yeah.
that
I'm
I've
like-
been really fighting with myself lately, and fighting because I have all this anger and animosity at the people who raised me because of how I turned out. I mean, I'm very proud of myself, and I'm very like excited about who I've become and all the things that I've done. But I just think about who I would be had I not gone through all of that,
Shit,
the
man.
shit that I would be able to accomplish, the phone calls to my doctors I would be able to make,
Yeah.
the way that I wouldn't have to fucking worry about everything or think everything's going to kill me or always looking over my shoulder or thinking everybody hates me or, the person I could be without all that shit.
I wouldn't know either one of you guys
But
if you hadn't been through it.
But who we are now is totally different. And we can just, you're right. It's a non-starter, but it's
For me,
like,
I should have said for me because I've
it's-
been down that road.
It's not a road you want to go down, but it's, and like Amanda said, it's I think it's also very normal to have those feelings,
Yeah.
but you have to remain in the present
You know
and
what?
understand that and understand that the future is yours to take if you're willing to show up for yourself.
Maybe this is my role here, and I'll be done after this statement. But being 98 years old, I've been down that road.
I thought you were 108, but
Thank you. I look good for my age. I am 108. But I stopped doing that 5 or 6 years ago, 4 years ago. Because, and here's why. Because, like my friend Cindy says, my wreckage is my resume. So I started looking forward. What the hell what did I get when I bought all this stuff? Let me unpack all this. Let's see what's in this box. And it turns out there's a lot of good stuff. And that's why you're here.
Yeah.
Because of what I've been through. And that's why you're here. Because of what I've been through.
Yeah. And it's okay to still feel angry and feel like life is exhausting as a result. But I think it is really important, like you said, to ground yourself in the present. And I think that's why, mindfulness is really, really fucking difficult. when you've
Mindfulness is about to
experienced
happen
trauma.
for me.
Yeah.
What's today? Wednesday? 3 days. I'll be mindful. I'll be on the beast.
Oh, yeah, because Kings Island opens
That's
this
right.
weekend.
Going down
Let's go.
Into that third tunnel down that hill.
So-
row 3 is my favorite on the Beast.
So,
Okay.
For some reason, it's like rougher and throws you around more. Anyway,
I like that.
in the interest of time, because we do have to start wrapping it up, is there anything that you wanted to dive into for the last, I think 10 minutes we have?
yes. So I have our positive note that we can end on.
Cool.
Yay.
Thank you.
But but I'm going to lead into that with the last more negative thing, which is that CPTSD can cause you to develop a very vicious inner critic that can turn you into a perfectionist. And
Yeah,
Amanda can speak to that.
hinted
I
at
can
that,
speak to
yeah.
that. And basically, I call it the extremist in my mind. It's
okay.
It's a voice that is pervasively. It's a voice that is like never satisfied with the current state of things and always wants them to be better and more perfect. And it's just a constant extreme viewpoint that I have to wrestle with. Now, the thing is I'm aware of it now. I wasn't before, but the extremist is also an asset because it turns you into somebody who can see great things for the future and achieve those things because you're able to put the pieces together and understand how it might get there. It's hard to work with it though, or in my case anyway, because it was born from not feeling like I was good enough, like throughout my whole childhood. And now I'm able to see the plus side of it. But I wrestled with it for years and years and years, man.
Bro,
and
you had a hard road to go because of the way you were raised and the fact that you're an artist. I think that I could see where that would make it infinitely more difficult.
I'm a creative person. I love to talk about stories. I love to talk about ideas.
The same way.
Like my dad and I can kind of get into it, but everyone else in my family will just be like, "Oh, that's nice," and I don't get that creative synergy with them. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And so I kind of grew up around people that didn't want to talk about that. And so whenever I found someone who would, it was like, "Oh, please be my friend." Like, you know what I mean? Like I would get so excited because all I want to do is tell stories and talk about ideas and shit. And like, so yeah, basically, my vicious inner critic, he can hold those ideas back and be like, it's not good enough. Like, no one's going to like it, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, and it's so silly because it's like, if I just approach my ideas with that mentality, it's just, I'm just going to sit on my ass and not get anything done. So, the great thing is like not to wrestle with myself too much.
Yeah.
Like it's to notice, like to notice when I've got something great and just like, for me, it helps to be always working on like 7 different things so I can just ping pong between them without like being like, this is my one sole focus. It needs to be perfect. Right. I'll just like jump between a bunch of different things. Yeah. But yeah,
I think too, this is where internal family systems therapy comes into play.
What?
IFS, internal family systems.
Okay.
Because as a result of childhood trauma or developmental trauma, we develop different systems in our mind and processes in the way as looking at things. And when do your own research on IFS because I don't really know enough about it to talk about it, but I know that I'm doing a lot of it in therapy currently right now.
Okay.
And it is really
good to hear about it.
Yeah, it is really helpful for me because knowing that a lot of these things and these self-inner critics are a result of me protecting myself, right? Like these were developed out of survival, and I can't keep, being mad at myself for the fact that like I talk shit to myself sometimes when I do something wrong, and having that, I think this is where like gentle parenting movement comes in because I literally have started gentle parenting myself. So whenever I like hit my hip on the corner, instead of being like, you're a stupid piece of shit, look where you're going. Yeah. Because that's the narrative that I was told growing up, right? Like I developed the inner voice of my caretakers.
Got you.
When that happens, I'm like, you're not, Amanda. It's okay. It's okay to be clumsy. It's fine. Stuff happens.
Give yourself grace.
Yeah, don't be so mad at yourself. Like I'll spill something on the floor and I'll be like, just fucking stupid. Like stuff that I would have punched myself in the face for like in the past.
Right.
Now am like, oh, it's okay. It's just silly. Like you made a mistake. Like, haha, like I'll laugh it off. Mm-hmm. And I think that's been really, really instrumental to my healing process is allowing myself the softness and the grace and the care that I never really received and giving that to myself, right? Like we think like we have that maladaptive daydreaming when we're children of somebody swooping in to save us or us living a whole different life. So I never thought that person that would swoop in and come and save me would be myself. But that is what is happening and that's what has to happen. And I don't think that I would be able to accept the help from anybody else because of the way that I am. Because, us helpers, it's hard to help the helper because of the way that we are.
Yeah.
And
healing.
so
oh my God.
I need to be that for myself before I can really even allow somebody to help me. That's something that I'm really like trying to learn how to do is allow people to help me and learning what that is and what that looks like.
That's 48 seconds of brutal truth.
Damn, like, mic drop,
Amanda.
Kaboom. Jesus Christ.
Nice.
That was sick.
You know what? I'm proud of you. That's really cool.
Thanks.
I got goosebumps again.
Yeah, it took me a long time to get here, but like the more videos that I watch on TikTok of like people gentle parenting their kids, it's like, I'll take that and I'll put that away for myself later on.
Oh.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Does it help you in
gentle
any
parent
way
yourself, guys.
Knowing that Joe still gets jealous, but it's not about you?
What?
Who?
My Joe Jonas.
Oh. Back to this.
I'm shocked that you didn't pick up on that reference like that.
Well, because Nick Jonas sings Jealous, not Joe.
My bad. You're right. I'm sorry, Joe. I don't even know where I got Joe Jonas from. I wouldn't
the
think
brother.
of him. Yeah, it's like
He's kicked
picking Billy
by the
Baldwin out of the
ocean.
Baldwins.
But I
Or
will
Daniel
say,
Baldwin.
fun aside, is that Joe Jonas actually sings Jealous better than Nick Jonas, in my opinion.
I've heard that.
All right, then. The last thing I wanted to jump onto is a real positive thing, which is, y'all ever heard of verbal ventilation? Nah.
Another album.
Well, what it is
I've actually never heard of that term.
survivors of CPTSD. It's essentially just radical empathy. It's when you find somebody like these two homies right here who would 100% listen to me just like barf out all of the shit that's going wrong with me and why. Listen with me, get mad with me, and then, end up in a nice warm hug feeling fine.
Yeah, that co-regulation is super important for sure.
Co-regulation.
When you regulate your nervous systems with another person. This happens in children as well.
Yeah.
So when
Yeah.
children fall down and you're like, oh my God, what happened? Blah, 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 blah. And they get really upset. It's because they're picking up on what you're doing, right? So if they fall down
I need
and
to be
you're like,
upset too.
and you're like, yay, they're like, oh, nothing's really wrong, right? And that co-regulation happens too with like babies. If they see you upset, they'll also start crying. That's why you go, oh, you're so cute. Like when they're crying, you try to like be happy, and it helps them co-regulate.
So the beast is where I'm mindful, but I had this place, and it was this girl I was dating, and if I put my forehead against hers, everything was
Co-regulation,
cool.
yeah.
Okay.
At the core of it, that's what it is.
Dude,
like people will do this a lot of times. with
verbal
their nervous,
ventilation.
Yeah, they'll do this a lot of times too. Like when they'll like put their hand on their heart and their hand on another person's heart and co-regulate. I think that's it's a good part of verbal ventilation. Is that after it all, when you have that co-regulation.
Yeah, that one wigged me out. I was like, I know I need this feeling, but I don't know why.
Yeah.
Let me give you a little image to help you along with what we're talking about. So this is actually from the book I was researching with. Imagine somebody with the sunshine with the sun shining over their head, and somebody else with a dark storm cloud over their head. Suddenly, the person with the storm cloud starts talking, and then there's lightning that starts coming out of the storm cloud. And then suddenly the storm cloud is over the other person's head, and the lightning is going between the two clouds. And then they hug, and the sun comes out. It's pretty cool. That's what it feels like.
Sounds like co-regulation.
Sounds like a metaphor.
It's imagery. It's both.
Dude, both of you guys killed it today.
Thanks.
This was good stuff. I was not looking forward to not like boundaries. I didn't have nightmares about before.
I felt so bad after that episode because I knew I made you both
Oh
uncomfortable.
my goodness. Yeah, but dude, you especially from where you were when you walked in here, great job.
Yeah.
You killed it today. That's good stuff.
Yeah, great. I'm unmedicated, guys. I don't have my Adderall today because there's a shortage.
Fucking hell.
And
Yeah.
if I were in that situation, I'd be on the floor, literally. You've seen it.
I have been a testament.
Not pretty.
Well, to all of you out there who are listening, find somebody to co-regulate with, find somebody to verbal ventilate with.
Yeah, it worked for me, Allison. If you just want to put her forehead, yours, I don't know where she is, but it'd be weird. You
And
want to introduce
also,
yourself
if
first.
you want to learn more about this kind of stuff, definitely do your own research, listen to podcasts, read books, things like that. Don't just take our word for everything. And talk to your care team.
And you have said this before, and I've said it before too, but the internet saved your life pretty much.
It literally did.
Find community.
Yeah.
There is
Yeah,
community
find
out
community.
there. Find your community.
Yeah, I wanted to say your experience with that when I discovered Jungian typology and like personality types and stuff.
Oh yeah.
When I did some research and learned about like the INFP personality type, I read it and just started crying.
You're an INFP?
Yeah, I'm an
ENFP.
Bet. All right. Yeah. Basically, when I read the profile, though, I was just like, I'm not like, it's okay to just be me. Like,
You should look into enneagrams too.
Yeah, I know a little bit about them.
I'm
but,
an
like,
eight.
not,
Cool, too.
yeah, not like a ton, but
I'm an
no.
8.
There is no 11. So what are you, INF what?
There is an
INFP.
11. It's out of 12, isn't it?
I think it's 9.
Oh,
I don't know.
No, I think you're
I'm
right.
I think he's
BAD,
I think he's probably
MOFO.
he's probably
You're a
of
mofo.
course. MOFO.
Oh, Lord.
Bro, like what was that was that's I don't remember seeing that on the results page. That's crazy.
I guess we'll have to really research that one.
Yeah.
You know,
He's probably an ENFP.
a long time ago, this guy I knew paid somebody to take the ACT for his kid and didn't do very well. But I would pay someone to take my personality test because I don't think I want to know what I am.
So you just be you and then tell me what you are.
I wonder if I picked somebody that I really like and had them take my
Yeah,
personality test.
I would think that it would be fun for you.
Really?
I think that you'd do a good job.
A good job.
You do a good job.
You can't get them wrong, can you?
No, but I think that you would like your result.
All right,
is
let's
what I'm
do
saying.
the Enneagram. You want to do that and we'll talk about it another time?
Sure.
Sure, why not?
One of
Yeah.
these days.
Sounds good. All right, everybody. Connect with your community.
Yes.
Reach out
Yes.
online. Also, subscribe and follow our podcast.
Absolutely, yeah.
If you drop into one of our 7 at 7s, recoverycenterhc.org, we will pick a prize for you. Yes, I just said a prize.
we are the In Our Issues crew. That includes you.
That's Amanda.
And we'll see you in the next one. I'm Nathan.
Bill.
I'm Amanda. Ow, my shoulder.
And you are awesome. Peace. In the book I was using for research, the author shared this joke that I thought was pretty thought-provoking about CPTSD. He said that if CPTSD were to be introduced into the DSM-5, the DSM-5 would then be as thin as a single sheet of paper, because CPTSD might explain that many mental illnesses sometime in the future. Kind of freaking crazy to think about. It kind of echoes Bill's thought from the beginning of the episode, actually, that he kind of thinks that we might find out that trauma is a bigger, major player in causing mental illness than we currently think. Coincidence? I'll let you decide. Next week, we have our first guest on the podcast. Her name is Ashley, and she is living with mental illness, and she's also a survivor of various uncomfortable things. And still, she has a big smile on her face and is a light in everyone's lives, honestly. She's very inspiring, and I'm really excited for you guys to meet her. Podcast production work by me. Original music composed and produced also by me. I'm Nathan Donnelly, and I'll see you in 2 weeks. Don't forget you're awesome. Peace out.